I'm honored to be with you today in my capacity as United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to development. We are at a crucial time. In a few days in Glasgow starts the UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP26, where key climate leaders will meet to discuss commitments. I would like to reiterate that climate action cannot be postponed for next decade or next year or tomorrow. We all have to act now. Climate change is one of the adverse global trends that pose a major challenge to the implementation of the right to development. The global climate crisis, the increasing number of natural disasters, and new global pandemics all have the potential to undo decades of development. The effects of climate change are not an environmental or economic issue. They impact the enjoyment of the rights to health care, education, housing, culture, and food. They destroy property and eradicate livelihoods and employment opportunities. In some instances, threaten the survival of entire communities. Already in my vision report in 2017, I identified climate change as one of the adverse global trends that poses a challenge to the implementation of the right to develop. The global climate crisis, the increasing number of natural disasters, and new global pandemics all have the potential to undo decades of development. Climate change is a global human rights threat multiplier. It already impacts and will increasingly impact a wide range of internationally guaranteed human rights, including the right to development. Extreme weather events, natural disasters, rising sea levels, floods, heat waves, droughts, desertification, water shortage, and the spread of tropical and vector-borne diseases can impede civil and political rights as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. Climate change impacts have already fallen on the most vulnerable parts of the global society. Those who have not yet reaped the benefits of development and are not able to shield themselves or adequately recover from the fires and floods aggravated by climate change. Indigenous peoples, internally displaced persons, persons with disabilities, and women in vulnerable situations are among the groups disproportionately affected by climate change. However, the communities and populations most affected by climate change are oftentimes the ones that do not participate in decision-making process on actions that address the consequences of climate change. According to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, women commonly face higher risk and greater burdens resulting from the impacts of climate change in situations of poverty, and the majority of the world's poor are women. Women's unequal participation in decision-making process and labor markets compound inequalities and often prevent women from fully contributing to climate-related planning, policy making, and implementation. Another challenge I identified for persons claiming to have their rights violated by projects aimed at reducing carbon emissions and other climate action is the absence of adequate transparency and accountability mechanisms for potential violations. We are meeting today amidst the global COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in a serious setback for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. The pandemic has created an unprecedented global public health and economic crisis of inestimable proportions. With much of the world economy and human society in suspension for more than a year, almost a year and a half now, every nation is experiencing distress. While developed countries have injected trillions of dollars into COVID-19 health, social safety net, and economic stimulus responses, many developing countries many developing countries severely lack the fiscal space to take similar measures. These constraints are exacerbated by high debt to GDP levels, high fiscal deficits, high cost of borrowing, and the depreciation of many currencies against the euro and the dollar. To address the immediate health response and economic support needs in developing countries, increased financial support and low-cost liquidity will be required. I would recommend, among others, sustained increases in the rapid disbursement of budget support by international organizations, including the World Bank and IMF, to developing countries. Fiscal stimulus in the form of unconditional grants is also necessary to address the urgent healthcare needs of developing countries, provide a safety net for the most vulnerable, protect jobs, and support economic activity where possible. It's my view that there must be a just transition away from a carbon-based economy and toward one that is based on sustainable development, the protection of human rights, and the principle no one left behind. This future can only be achieved by understanding the Paris Agreement in the context of the right to development and equity between the global north and south, whereby the global north assists the south in building a climate resilient economy. This climate resilient economy will require significant funding for developing countries so that they can adapt to climate change and become equal partners in mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. Lessons learned from COVID-19 pandemic about global connectivity, along with the economic infusion that many governments are putting towards recovery can facilitate a just transition. In the face of the climate crisis, governments must design and implement ambitious and comprehensive policies and measures that pave the way for a real and transformative ecological transition. Countries must ensure the right to development by supporting development models that achieve a safe climate and meet the sustainable development goals, including the need to align both production and consumption patterns to sustainable and equitable levels. In my report to the Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly this year, I have provided practicable recommendations geared to meet these challenges in key areas: data collection and disaggregation, human rights and environmental assessments, inclusion, participation and access to information, accountability and remedies. I encourage all countries participating in the COP26 to integrate these recommendations in their decision making. I thank you all for your kind attention.